Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Eliminate the Risk of Compromised Credentials with Unified Identity Protection. My name is Ezra Ullman, and I'm the Director of Demand Generation here at Silverfort, and I'll be your host for today. Before we start, a few notes. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. You can submit questions at any time just by typing your questions into the Q&A area of the control panel. We will address as many questions as we have time for at the end. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Yiftach Keshet. Yiftach is the Director of Product Marketing at Silverfort. Prior to joining Silverfort, he served in various product management and product marketing roles with cybersecurity market leaders such as Microsoft, Palo Alto Networks, and Team8. So Yiftach, I think we're ready to go. So take it away.
Thank you, Ezra. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. In the next 45 minutes or so, we'll deep dive into identity-based attacks and compromised credentials and the risk to introduce and understand how we can eliminate this risk or at least significantly reduce it. So our agenda for today, first we'll start with identity-based attacks overview. Identity-based attacks are attacks that utilize compromised credentials to access enterprise resources. So we use these terms interchangeably. We'll understand what makes these identity-based attacks a security blind spot. And we'll get familiar with Silverfort Unified Identity Protection Platform and understand how Silverfort delivers real-time protection against identity-based attacks. Following that, we'll deep dive into what Unified Identity Protection is, the capabilities, implementation, and results that enables it to be the ultimate solution for eliminating the risk of compromised credentials. So without further ado, let's start. Identity-based attacks. I think the best way to understand the scope or the severity of anything is just by taking a quick look at some numbers. And I have two interesting numbers here. First one is this statistics. Over 15 billion credentials are circulating in the dark web. This was taken from a report made by cybersecurity firm Digital Shadows called From Exposure to Takeover. And take a few seconds just to absorb this, this fact. Over 15 billion credentials. Okay, we're talking about credentials of all types. It could be my personal credential for some website, but there are also enterprise credentials, domain admin credentials, users credentials. All of them are circulating in the dark web, ready to be sold for any threat actor that wants to utilize them to access maybe yours and maybe yours or other enterprise resources. Now, this only suggests that there is a risk, right? But the next number we'll see can teach us that it's not just theoretical risk, but actually stolen or compromised credentials is the #1 cause of data breaches. This was taken from the Cost of Data Breach report made by IBM in 2020. So these two figures go together, okay? It's not only potential risk, it's here and actual, and credentials are actually even surpassing malware as the #1 cause for data breaches. So it's definitely a risk, okay? So let's get to understand a bit better what are these identity-based attacks and what are they made of. So we have these attacks that involve compromised user credentials. We can classify them into 3 groups. First one is account takeover. And in this group, the attacker accesses through the public internet with compromised user credentials of SaaS applications or cloud workloads, okay? Again, as everybody knows, when you have resources in the public cloud, the only thing that stands between anyone and these resources are just the credentials. So this is account takeover. This is the first type of attack. The second type of attack is malicious remote access. And in that case, the attacker has compromised the credentials of either the VPN or ZTNA. Now, in the last year, with the COVID-19 roaming around the world, this type of remote access has become more and more prevalent and resulting with numerous cyber attacks that we've seen. And these credentials are highly targeted by threat actors of all types and kinds. Now, when the attacker is using these compromised credentials of the VPN or ZTNA, he will access either internet-facing servers or the enterprise intranet itself. The third group is lateral movement. And unlike the malicious remote access or account takeover, lateral movement is not the initial access. It's not the initial compromise or the initial foothold of the attacker in your network. Rather, it's the second step. Following a compromise of endpoint, workstation, or server, now the attacker seeks to expand, whether to on-prem endpoints and servers, or cloud workloads, or SaaS applications. Now, the most important thing to understand here, and this is not the common perception in the security world today, is that all these attacks share the same root cause. Okay, and and at a first glance, it might strike us as a bit surprising, because we regularly think that SaaS applications protection, for example, belongs to the CASB, cloud workloads to the CWPP, malicious remote access to the network security, lateral movement in the on-prem to the endpoint protection. Okay, and actually, the protection against these attacks today, the common practice is to disperse them between these products and groups. But when we take a deeper look, we understand that we have a single root cause, and this single root cause must be addressed. Now, diving in a bit deeper, when we're talking about compromising user credentials, it means that when the attacker is accessing resources in your environment, the way it works is that the attacker uses authentication with valid credentials. And basically it means that the attacker uses your legitimate authentication infrastructure. Okay? And it doesn't matter what IDP you're using. It's regardless if it's the Active Directory on-prem or the cloud IDP like Azure AD or Okta for SaaS applications, or the VPN or the PAM. It doesn't matter. The point is that all of these products, from their perspective, there's no difference between a legitimate user that provides the right credentials and an attacker that has compromised this user credentials and is now providing them. The IDP basically knows only that valid credentials were provided. And this, as we'll see further on, is one of the main reasons these attacks continue to go unaddressed. Now, how can we protect from this type of attacks? So in order to understand that, let's first zoom out for a minute and say, so how we protect against any cyber threat in general. And the way we do it, whenever we want to protect against any type of attack, so we monitor a certain activity, legitimate activity within the IT environment. We're analyzing it to understand if it turns out to be malicious. And if this is indeed the case and we validate it's malicious, we block or terminate this activity on the spot. If we'll take more examples that you might be more familiar with, so in the case of endpoint, the EDR, EPP, they're addressing malware, right? So the legitimate activity are the running processes. The EDR monitors all the processes that are executing on the machine. Now, if any of these processes suddenly starts behaving in an anomalous manner, for example, encrypting files, calling Windows APIs from strange memory locations, accessing processes that it shouldn't. So we determine, the EPP or EDR determines that it's malware and terminates the process at the spot. In a very similar manner, the firewall monitors network traffic, okay, inbound and outbound. And if the firewall sees, for example, that we have volumes of network traffic, tons of packets attempting to go out to some unknown destination, so the firewall can deduce that it's data exfiltration and it will block the traffic altogether. Now, what is common, what resides at the core in this flow is that if it's not real time, there is no value. Okay, it doesn't help us to know retroactively that the malware was executed, right? If we want to protect against malware, we need to be able to terminate it as soon as we detect it as such. Okay, same goes for data exfiltration. So if we want to apply this real-time protection to identity-based attacks, and remembering that we said that what enables identity-based attacks is the use of valid though compromised credentials. So the flow would look like that. Real-time lateral movement to identity-based or identity attack protection would involve monitoring legitimate authentication attempts, understanding when these authentication attempts and any attempt is malicious, and if that's the case, to block this authentication, never letting it mature to an actual resource access, okay? And from this, the logically follows that the only component in your IT environment that can deliver such real-time protection is the identity provider. And again, regardless if it's Active Directory or Okta or Ping or Oracle or any other, because the only component that can do this type of analysis in real time is the one that gets access requests, okay, and has to authorize them and said, okay, yeah, indeed, the user X has provided the correct password. So it might seem as if the problem is basically almost solved, right? If the identity providers see authentications in real time, so what's the problem in defending against the identity-based attacks? And how come these 15 billion credentials that we've seen circulating in the dark web 10 slides ago, how come they're still the #1 cause of data breaches? Now, the problem is that there are critical blind spots within today's identity providers. These blind spots are basically, roughly we can divide them into two groups. The first group is detection gap, okay? Your IDPs today are not very good on detecting and discerning between a legitimate authentication made by one of your users and a malicious one made by an attacker. And this is because your IDP architecture is siloed by design. So you have Cloud IDP for SaaS applications, and you have Active Directory for servers and endpoints. You have also maybe PAM for privileged accounts and VPN or ZTNA for remote users. Now, each one, none of these IDPs talks, okay, or sees or understands what is taking place within the domain of the other IDP. So if, for example, I have an attacker with compromised user credentials, traversing throughout the Active Directory environment, okay, doing lateral movement past the ticket, etc. Okay, featuring a behavior that is definitely malicious. Okay, now if this attacker wants to take these same credentials and access Office 365 and through the Cloud IDP, now the Cloud IDP doesn't have any way to know that this user has behaved maliciously 2 seconds ago. Okay, and any risk analysis that's taking place is always on a local basis. This results with insufficient context and inferior risk analysis. So that's the first gap. Okay, limited ability to determine that that a given authentication attempt is malicious. The second gap is much more severe, and it's the partial attack prevention. Remember, we said that authentication here is the key enabler. Now, there's an ultimate security solution to prevent malicious authentication, which is MFA. Now, actually, according to Microsoft, if you have MFA, so you're 99% less likely to be compromised. The problem is that while MFA is available for SaaS applications and VPN as well, MFA, I mean, when I say MFA, I mean not only the standard MFA, but also the high-end MFA with the risk-based authentication and conditional access. So while it is available for SaaS applications and VPN, it is totally absent from core components of your environment. For example, servers, databases, endpoints, homegrown applications, file shares, and many others. And that means, for example, that if I'm an attacker with compromised user credentials and I'm attempting to access any of these resources, what's happening is that even if somehow I am able to say, look, something here is anomalous, this might be a malicious authentication attempt, I have no way of enforcing this protection in real time. Okay, so these two gaps, the detection and the prevention, these are what stand behind behind the numbers that we've seen. This is why compromised credentials are today I would say in terms of cybersecurity, they are in the top, if not, I would say these are the top risk to enterprises today. So this is the challenge that Silverfort has attempted to solve. And the way we solve it at Silverfort is with the new concept of unified identity protection. Okay, so Silverfort is a unified identity protection platform, and every word matters here. So what does the unified stands for? We've said you have your IDPs, okay, in your environment, maybe one, maybe two, maybe four. Now Silverfort natively integrates with all of these IDPs, and Silverfort serves as the central risk analysis brain, if you will. Whenever a given IDP gets an access request, it forwards it to Silverfort. Silverfort will apply risk analysis and determine whether to allow, block, or require MFA. Now, what has changed here, that instead of the siloed visibility that the IDP had, right? If I'm a cloud IDP, for example, I can see only the SaaS application. Silverfort sees everything because it gets in real time all the user activity from all the IDPs. So basically, it doesn't matter whether we are talking about cloud access, database access, endpoint access, PAM access, VPN, file share, legacy application. On each and every authentication made by each and every user, okay, Silverfort applies continuous visibility across all network, cloud, and on-prem access attempts, performs high precision AI-based risk analysis based on the full context, right? This is what we've explained before. And this risk analysis enables enforcement of adaptive access policy, allow block MFA on all resources, including the ones that we've talked about in the former slide, including all the resources that this type of protection you could have never applied this protection for them before. Okay, and this is I would say that these are very, very big news, and the fact that you can extend this type of identity protection to every resource, it doesn't matter if it's a legacy application that your dev team wrote 20 years ago, or if it's an endpoint access or file share or anything else, every resource that you have accessed by any user is monitored, analyzed, and protected. Okay, so that's the new concept of unified identity protection platform. And what we'll do now is understand better what this unified identity protection platform actually includes. What are the capabilities? What is the implementation? What is the results? And so we'll go over these, and we'll see several demos of the product. And I believe by the end of this session, all of us will be much more versed with the concept of unified identity protection platform and how it indeed can eliminate the risk of compromised user credentials. So let's think of unified identity protection as sort of a framework, okay? At the bottom, we have capabilities. The first capability is MFA Everywhere, okay? We won't deep dive now on what are the bits and bytes and in terms of technology that enables Silverfort to be the first and only solution that can do that. Let's just assume we have it, and we'll soon see it in the demo how it looks in practice. So MFA Everywhere, MFA on each and every type of resource that you have, and apply this to all users. Okay, that's the first I would call the building block capability. The second one is visibility and risk analysis across all access attempts made by all users. Okay, and all users here is tricky because, of course, there are human users, right? I mean, your employees, but as I'm sure most of you know already, you have also a lot of non-human users. You have service accounts. You have a lot of accounts that are created behind the scenes that are used for machine-to-machine communication. Now, these accounts also have username and credentials. They're also targeted by attackers. Now, if we want to have a comprehensive protection, we need to have visibility and to each and every access attempt made by any type of user, and not only visibility, but also the ability to analyze and determine the relative risk of each access attempt. The third building block is actually the result of combining these two, and this is risk-based authentication, right? We're taking the ability to assign a granular risk score to any access attempt, and we say, okay, from now, if any access attempt exceeds a certain level that is configurable, that we can determine based on our policies and personal or organizational preferences, whenever the risk exceeds a certain level, require MFA. Okay, so Here, like this was with a single policy, for example, you can actually govern the secure access to all your resources. Now, how did and this, again, how you might ask yourself, so what does this has to do with compromised credentials? And the answer is basically everything, because I'm sort of pragmatic. I'm saying, okay, I can't prevent attackers from compromising the credentials. But what I can do is to ensure that the credentials that they've compromised, that they can't use these compromised credentials to access any resource within my environment. That's the capability of risk-based authentication. These capabilities add up to implementation of identity-based zero trust. And I'm positive that many of you have heard the term zero trust before. Now, usually you hear the term zero trust in the context of network security, right? It's saying, okay, let's rebuild the network, let's break it into micro segments and do some kind of a security check at the gateway of each such micro segment. Now, this is definitely a good implementation. I personally think that zero trust should be applied wherever you can, but identity-based zero trust is something totally different, much more granular, because you're not working at the network segment level, but you're applying this least privilege access policy on each and every access attempt. So you have something very strong here, and we'll elaborate on zero trust further on. The result that you get at the end of the day, when you have these capabilities and implementations all stacked up together, you get real-time protection of identity-based attacks. Okay, all the slide we've seen before, the slide that says, okay, we have account takeover, we have also malicious remote access, we have lateral movement. All these identity-based attacks, all these attacks that rely on compromised user credentials, you get, if you have unified identity protection in place, you can gain real-time protection against them. And now we'll go over each and every capability implementation result. We'll elaborate a bit on each of them and see how they look in practice in Silverfort. So MFA Everywhere, that's the easiest one to understand. We have here, again, I have only one slide and I didn't want to be too much crowded. So that's just a sample of all the resources, all the core resources that you can't apply MFA to today, okay? And I think, what's tragic is that most of us don't even think of it as a gap. I mean, we're taking for granted that MFA is not even an option, okay? And in a way, we have grown to accept a reality which is a critical security gap. Now, MFA Everywhere basically means that you can checkbox the MFA on every resource that you have. And let me show you how does it look in practice, okay? So basically, here I am, okay? I'm an admin, this is my console, and I'm doing psexec, this command, and I want to access this machine remotely. This is my username, Yiftach, and I've inserted my password. Now, this remote access tool is something admins use all the time, and attackers do it as well, okay? Now, Silverfort enables you to enforce MFA on this access method. Only when I verify, I can access this resource. The same goes also with Windows PowerShell PS Center session. Okay, I enter the command, I enter my credentials, but access is only granted once I verified in my phone. Now, let's take another example, file share. File share stores sensitive data. Now, you might not know that, but every access to file share entails an authentication. And here also, I can enforce MFA on this access and access the file share only once I've verified it in my phone. And that's actually extremely, extremely important because, the vast majority of ransomware attacks that utilize automated propagation to infect your entire environment, they actually spread through this authentication to file shares. Now, if I can enforce MFA here, I'm able to eliminate this type of attacks altogether. Now, these were the cool things, but also standard things like VPN, for example, okay? I attempt to connect, but again, I have Silverfort MFA here as well. Another example is connecting through RDP. Here also, I can force Silverfort's MFA. And of course, if I'm trying to connect to a SaaS application, same goes here, okay? Basically, that's the concept of MFA everywhere. And this is the first time this type of protection is available to the enterprise users. So that was MFA everywhere. Let's talk about visibility and risk analysis. So we have your user, okay? This user is blue, which typically means that he's okay. No, there's no risk detected. Let's accompany this user in his journey throughout several resources. So the user logs in to his endpoint, and then through the VPN, and then he logs to, and then he connects to the VPN. So Silverfort behind the scenes says, this looks good. It's normal. We don't see anything. We don't see anything suspicious here. Then the user logs in to connects to Active Directory. Okay, and again, we both see the actions and we understand their entailed risk. Now, this user accesses a database, and this is a database this user has never accessed before. Okay, so here we see something suspicious. We see the activity, and we're also able, by the behavioral profile of the user, we're also able to say something here is not right. Okay, let's elevate the risk. Okay, maybe to medium. Now we're watching this user much more closely. And for example, now if he's accessing some maybe cloud workloads of some DevOps environment that he was never, that indeed he should have never visited, we can say, okay, this user is at risk. And what does it mean that the user is at risk? It means that there's a valid probability that his credentials were compromised by an attacker, and actually the one who's attempting to access is not the real user, but actually the attacker. Now, how does it look in Silverfort screen? So this is Silverfort dashboard, and you can see we see all the authentications in the environment. If we skip to the insight screen, we see here a breakdown of all the activity and the entities within the environment. We see risky users, risky resources. We can see various breakdowns that support visibility into understanding what is the relative risk of my environment. Now, if I go to this machine, and click on its investigation, I will see that it's in high risk. Okay, we can see it over here. And when we'll start scrolling, we'll see all the access attempts that were made to this machine, both by service accounts like SVC File Manager and actual users. Now, if we'll skip to top risk users and we look at SFAdmin, okay, we see it is at critical risk. And when we'll go into the risk indicators box, this can definitely give us a sense of the power of Silverfort Risk Engine, because Silverfort monitors numerous risk indicators. Some of them related to attributes or to behavior or to privileges or to any bit and byte of the user activity that can help us build a behavior profile and understand when a deviation might mean risk. We're monitoring it. Okay, so this critical risk is the byproduct of this risk indicators. Now, let's talk about visibility. If we'll go to the log screen and filter on SFAdmin, so here we see the entire authentication trail, all the access attempts, everything that this SFAdmin has accessed. And if I'm a forensic team and I'm now conducting an investigation of a forensic investigation of an event that entailed anything that's related to compromised user credentials, so this type of single pane of glass is extremely valuable, because I can easily see anything that is not normal, and I get also Silverfort's input on everything that has taken place here. So let's move further on. And so we said when we chain the MFA everywhere and the visibility and risk analysis, we get the risk-based authentication. And basically that means that whenever I'm a user, I want to access any resource, the first thing would be risk analysis. And based on this risk analysis, will determine whether I can access or I'm blocked or I'm required to provide MFA. Now, how does this look? So here, this is my user Yiftach. I'm at low risk. I have 0 risk indicators, okay? And that means that if from my machine, I'm now trying to log into Amazon, to AWS through Ping Federation, which is another integration with an IDP that we have, okay? So I'll provide my username, I'll provide my password, I will click to sign on and wait patiently until the network connection will enable me to see what's going on. And I will, spoiler, what you'll see in a few seconds, you'll see that I'm connecting seamlessly. Why? Because I'm at no risk. So Silverfort says username and password are definitely enough here. Now, let's suppose my credentials got compromised by an attacker. Okay, this attacker has compromised this machine and is now launching an attack, attempting to do a pass the hash with my username and password. Now, Silverfort, first of all, Silverfort blocks this attack, okay? But the fact that the attacker was able to launch this attack means that I'm at risk. So behind the scenes, Silverfort, remember that it was in low, so I'm now, you don't see it now, but I'm now critical, okay? Now, the attacker that will now try to use these compromised credentials to access AWS the same way that I've done a minute and a half ago, okay? Now this attacker is about to discover that he can't do anything with these compromised credentials because when he tries, now the access is not seamless anymore. I get an MFA notification and I'm saying, no, I'm not trying to access AWS console and hence the attacker will be fenced out, okay? This is how risk-based authentication works. And it's combining the power of extending, and now you've seen here, the example here was with AWS through PingFed, right? But in real life, it could be any resource in your environment. Let's move onwards to identity-based zero trust. So what do we see here? Okay, so I have a user, okay, and let's assume that I'm this user and I'm logged into my machine. Okay, here we have the on-prem environment. We have a firewall, we have Active Directory, and we have a database. So as you can see, it's a rather thin environment. Okay, I'm sure that your environments are much more populated. But you know, since we're here in 2020 and not in I don't know, not 1995, so the on-prem is just part of what I have. I also have numerous SaaS applications that my business uses, and I'm accessing them through Azure Active Directory. Okay. Additionally, I have also a DevOps environment with Jenkins machine. Okay, and I authenticate these machines with my through Active Directory. Okay, so what does this has to do with the base zero trust? So if again we'll sketch here a sample user journey, we'll say, okay, first I'm accessing Azure Active Directory. Now we're doing risk analysis, great, and the risk analysis said this user is good. This user can access Active Directory. There's no problem. Okay. Now one might think, okay, so if I've trusted this user to access Active Directory, I can also trust this user to access any other resource. Comes the zero trust mindset and says, no, it doesn't work like that. For every new resource access, for example, connecting to the Active Directory through the VPN, whenever your trust is always reset to 0. Okay? No, we don't trust you. The fact that you've accessed Active Directory, Azure Active Directory a minute ago, irrelevant. We're now doing whole new risk analysis from scratch, taking into account all your context, okay? And in the similar manner, if now, after logging into Azure Active Directory, now I want to access Zoom or G Suite or Dropbox, again, it doesn't matter that I was allowed to access Active Directory before. I always go through this process all the time. Now, this process takes place behind the scenes, okay? And as we've seen before, if at the end of the evaluation, Silverfort will determine that there is no risk here, so great. So great. So you'll see nothing. You'll get an access. You'll get seamless access. But if not, you'll probably be required MFA or even block access. Okay, and this goes also when I want to access database, when I want to access Jenkins, when I want to access any other of the numerous resources that I have in my environment. Okay, and this is a new concept, by the way, identity-based zero trust. Okay, and unlike the network zero trust that we've talked about before, this is, as we've said, much more granular because it is founded and it is targeted at each and every resource access attempt, not only at the perimeter or at the micro perimeter level. And it's much easier to implement because you don't have to do any modification or any infrastructure change. All you have to do is just to deploy Silverfort within the environment, and then within 2 minutes you can craft these policies for all your users. So how does this look like in Silverfort? So we're going back to me. I'm at low risk, zero risk indicators. Similar to what we've seen before. Now I'm not accessing PingFed, but Azure Active Directory. And welcome to Azure. I can log in seamlessly, right? Because my risk score is low. Now, what will happen now is that we'll see very similar scenarios before. We have an attacker that's compromised my password, again, attempting to connect to a remote machine, okay? But again, in this time, the attacker fails, the access is blocked, but, okay, as we've seen before, it is blocked, of course, because when I get the MFA notification and say, no, I don't want to, I never try to access. Now, immediately we see that my risk score is critical, okay? And the risk indicators of abnormal authentication activity and suspected lateral movement, okay? Now I'm at risk. Now, it doesn't mean that I can't connect, but I will have to use, I'll have to use the MFA, and the attacker won't be able to log, the attacker will never be able to log in with my credentials again. The final result, so what do we get, okay, at the end of the day from all these capabilities in zero trust implementation? We get real-time protection against all of these attacks. Now, it's very important for you to know that all these attacks basically rely and rightfully assume that nobody can, that no one within their targeted environment can know that the credentials they're using are actually malicious, okay? And in the ability to introduce MFA, to do risk analysis, to enforce zero trust, identity-based zero trust, we're really turning the tables on attackers, okay? This is something they do not expect, okay? Think of it as the first antivirus in a non-antivirus world, okay? Or antibiotics in a non-antibiotics world. This is something that really forces attacker to do a mega adjustments of all their common techniques and tools. Now, this protection, we deliver it with access policies, and the concept here is multi-layered. We can build policies that are rule-based, that anticipate the activities the attackers like you to do, and say when these activities occur, block or require MFA. We can have risk-based policies that says, okay, remember we said we're doing disability and risk analysis. So whenever the risk exceeds a certain threshold, okay, whenever the anomalies the attacker by definition has to create, whenever they add up to a certain risk level, okay, require MFA or block. And since we're monitoring all the authentication traffic, all the access attempts, we can definitely, Silverfort can say, this authentication, okay, has all the features of pass the hash or pass the ticket or brute force or any other technique that attackers utilize today. And let's see how it looks. This is the last demo. So what I have here this machine, RD61. I'm the admin, and I'm logging into this machine, remote one, okay, easily. The same way I've done it with PSExec, an attacker can do it as well in a compromised machine. This is what happens in a non-Silverfort world, okay? Both the attacker succeeds to connect, okay, with my compromised user credentials, and me as well. And the Active Directory can't tell the difference between the legitimate admin access and the malicious attacker access. Now, how can we address this with Silverfort? Now, if we'll navigate now to Silverfort's policies screen. And here we'll see a policy that is called Lateral Movement Protection, Admin Credentials from Non-Admin Machine. And basically what this policy says is that it says, okay, what do attackers like to do? They like to compromise the admin credentials, right? But they'll never be actually they'll never execute code on the admin's machine. It will be on other compromised machine that the admin has execution privileges on. Okay, so that's the policy that says whenever the credentials of Yiftach, the admin, are used to connect with PowerShell or PSExec from any device, okay, trigger MFA unless they're connecting from their own, from my machine, okay? And this simple policy, basically we're able to weed out more than 90% of the common lateral movement attacks. Now, we'll now enable this policy, and we'll go back to the attacker screen, and we'll try to launch again. So we're moving back in time. Okay, we'll see the attacker now attempts to launch the exact same attack that it tried before, but this time it doesn't work because I've got an MFA notification. Okay, so the access is blocked. The attacker couldn't access, and basically he's totally perplexed. They don't understand why what worked a minute and a half ago doesn't work now. Okay, that was the rule-based. But we'll see now. I'll show now a risk-based protection. Now, let's assume that our attacker is resourceful and he's using Mimikatz to dump the memory and search for additional users or passwords or hashes. Now, we see here that the attacker has discovered a user called SVC File Manager, which is a service account. And we see the attacker has not only the username SVC File Manager, but the NTLM hash as well. So now the attacker has everything he needs in order to take these and try to connect to a remote machine with the service account, username, and password. Okay, so we have here a script that automates this process. The attacker provides the SVC File Manager name, but as you'll soon find out, he's waiting to be connected, but he couldn't access this remote machine. Okay, very strange. Why is that? Now, if we'll go to Silverfort's dedicated service account screen, we'll see our SVC File Manager. Okay, we see that it is protected by policy, and we'll investigate. We'll see that it's in critical risk due to 4 risk indicators of abnormal authentication activity that add up to suspected lateral movement. Okay. Now, service accounts are predictable. They are repetitive. They should never behave in unpredictable. So this basically means that whenever a service account features this type of behavior, the risk goes up and we block its access. Now we enable a pattern-based lateral movement detection pattern-based. We enable this policy, and basically what this policy means is that whenever we'll see Silverfort will detect a pass the hash attack, an authentication that is carried out through pass the hash, it will require MFA in order to complete the connection. And we're going back to the attacker screen. Now, after the 2 attacks failed, the 2 first attacks failed, so the attacker now searches for another username. Surprise, he has me, Yiftach, and this is my NTLM hash. And now the attacker will launch pass the hash with my username, okay? But the policy went into place. I got a notification. I blocked it. We go to my investigation screen. We see that we have weak encryption protocol used, which is indicative of pass the hash and hence suspected lateral movement. And this is how we have prevented this identity-based attacks with my compromised user credentials based on the ability to detect malicious patterns. So if we'll summarize what everything we've talked about, so we've learned that compromised credentials are a key component in attacker's arsenal. We also understand user identities are highly targeted attack surface. existing security identity products fail to deliver real-time protection against attacks that rely on compromised user credentials. And Unified Identity Protection Platform eliminates this risk altogether. How? With the capabilities of MFA Everywhere, visibility and risk analysis and risk-based authentication, and implementation of identity-based zero trust. And all of this basically gives us the result of real-time protection against account takeover, malicious network connection, and lateral movement. So with this, I'm through with presenting and telling my story. And if there are any questions, I'll be delighted to address them.
Thank you very much, Yiftach, for an enlightening discussion. We're going to start answering the questions. We have some questions in our queue here that have been submitted during today's presentation. And please note that you can do continue to submit questions even as we answer the ones we have. Okay, the first question is, one of our listeners has noted that our website says that we're agentless. Is this true?
Yeah, definitely. The innovative technology that we developed here at Silverfort actually enables us to protect assets with MFA without needing to install any agents on them. Okay, so if you have 20,000 endpoints and servers in your environment, we can protect all of them without installing a single agent on any of them.
Okay, great. And the follow-up question to that is, it was asked, does our solution cover native laptop sign-on from boot time, initial sign-on to workstation? Okay,
great question. So actually, yes, okay, but yes, it covers everything. However, for this specific MFA implementation of the local logon to the endpoint, here we do require an installation of lightweight agent. Okay, but for all other activities, remote connections, etc., RDP, command line interfaces, all the rest of them, okay, it doesn't require any agent at all. Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, how is the zero trust that you were talking about earlier different than other than TNA solutions? Okay, great question. So I mean, I've briefly talked about it throughout the webinar, but again, let's make it absolutely clear. ZTNA basically they try to implement the concept of zero trust in the networking world, okay, which is great. But the problem is that, first of all, it's a mega project, okay, that can take that can take tons of time. It involves rebuilding our entire networking infrastructure. Plus, in terms of granularity and security checks, okay, whenever you're allowing anyone to access the new micro perimeter you've created, within this perimeter, this user account can access any resource at will, okay? And comparing to identity-based zero trust, okay, here it's much more granular because it's not only the first security check that you need to pass, it's all of them per any attempted resource access. Okay, thank you. Our next question is, can't you streamline all authentication traffic to your SIEM to gain protection from identity-based attacks? So yeah, we hear this question often. So theoretically, yes. Okay, I mean and in that way, you might think you can address the silos problem that we've talked about earlier, right? You're saying, okay, so I have a SIEM, so let's connect my IDP and my Active Directory and my VPN. Let's connect all of them and send their access logs, their authentication logs to the SIEM, and the SIEM will have the logic to join everything. And I'll be able to see to gain visibility and to apply risk analysis to the full access, to the full authentication trail of all users. So basically, yes, you can do it. Okay. Based on my experience, again, it's a big project. It's not a big deal. You have to do tons of work of normalizing all the logs and synchronizing between them. Plus, even let's assume, okay, that you have a very qualified security team, you have good SIEM analysts, you've done, it took a month, but it's up and running. Still, the only thing you've solved is the ability to detect, okay, you actually have made zero progress in the ability to prevent these attacks in real time.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get up the next question. Okay, the next question is, if MFA is so effective against lateral movement, how come it's never been used for this purpose before?
Okay, great question. And basically, I think that what the problem is that until now, the 100% of the IT and security world just took for granted that MFA cannot be used in these environments. There have been some attempts to do it. They failed. The authentication protocols like Kerberos or LDAP or NTLM, they do not support natively MFA. And in terms of technology, innovation, and IP, I think that's the coolest thing that we do in Silverfort. We are actually the only ones that found a way to implement MFA on what you can call the highways of lateral movement of the PSExec, WMI, PowerShell, all the command line remote access utilities. Okay, so yeah, it's extremely effective. But in terms of technology, I'm not aware of any other vendor that can provide this capability except us.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let me just check and make sure. Let me just check the queue for 1 second. Is there any more questions? Okay. We have a question about implementation. Please discuss the implementation and deployment of the solution in enterprise.
Okay, so it's rather straightforward. Okay, I'll simplify it a bit. Okay, we can definitely have a longer discussion on this further on. But you have a virtual machine, okay, that is deployed in your network, and the Active Directory. Let's assume a very simple environment. Okay, where you have only Active Directory in the on-prem, and maybe you have also Azure AD. Okay, so the VM sits in the machine, sits within the environment. The Active Directory forwards every access request to this VM. Okay. Now this VM performs some sort of a risk analysis. Okay, and sends it back. We have another VM which is the management console, and this VM does the same thing, but the same thing that the first one has done with Active Directory. The second one is doing with the cloud IDP. Okay, so basically, and again, so the implementation deployment vary, per the size of the environment. For any installation that we have an automated sizing tools that basically assesses how much how many virtual machines are required based on the traffic volume and throughput. And basically this is everything that has to it. Okay, it's adding several new virtual machines to your environment.
Okay, great. All right, I think that's all the questions we have time for. Again, so thank you, Yiftach, and thanks for everyone for attending today's webinar. Our next webinar will be scheduled soon, and we'll be sending you an invitation to attend it. But of course, you can always feel free to contact us beforehand. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, and goodbye.